I knew this movie would be good, but I didn't know it would break my heart. That's right. For the very first time ever, I watched The Godfather 2. What is up, everybody? This is your host, Jake Baker, and I'm here today to talk to you about The Godfather 2. That's right. Maybe it's a big shocker, but I'm following up my first episode about The Godfather with The Godfather 2. I haven't seen that either. So I watched it for the first time just now, and it was pretty intense. I told myself that the first episode was going to be the only episode where I kind of talked about myself and all that good stuff, but hey, I feel like if you listen to this show, maybe you want to get to know me a little bit. Although if you do listen to this show, it's probably only because you do know me. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself. I feel like I'm vaguely remembering some of the stuff I said in the first episode, and I wanted to touch on something I think is interesting in that obviously podcasts have become sort of the radio of the future, and it's enticing because anyone can do it. I mean, hell, I'm sitting here with some dumb Yeti mic I bought and a pop filter, which hopefully helps, I guess. And sitting in my room, it's 2 a.m. and I'm by myself, and here I am. I'm making a show. Oh, man. And it's fun. We'll see as we go. Hopefully, ideally. Yeah, that was the other thing I did want to tackle is not only do I like this show as an excuse to go back and finally watch the movies I've never seen before, but ideally it'll be like a way for me to kind of increase my speaking capacity to a certain extent. There's a lot of shows I've gone back on and listened to some of the first episodes they ever recorded, and boy, their patter and their speaking ability, it's just so much less than when you get like 100 episodes into something and you're just enunciation and you're, wow, I slurred the word enunciation. That's something special. Maybe in the future, after I've done like 100 episodes, I'll be able to say the word enunciation without like, oh man, I think I just slurred it again. Oh boy, I should just give up, huh? No, that's the whole point. It's the second episode. I'm working my kinks out, not the sexual ones. I'll maybe make a separate podcast for that, sort of a Patreon only subscriber thing. Like I'll tell you about. Oh, I'm not even going to tell you. It's too dirty. I can't share that with you people. But yeah, I just want to get a couple personal things out of the way. First, before I got into the movie itself, I tease you with I watched The Godfather 2 for the first time, and then I blather on for however long this ends up being edited to, and you had to listen to my bullshit. But hey, I thank you for sticking through it. You guys are the true heroes. And now that I'm already feeling extremely self-conscious, it's time to move on to the next segment of the show, which is where I try my darndest to summarize what the movie was about. And boy, I had a thought in the middle of this movie. I think it came literally right before the part where it actually said intermission. I do my best while I watch these movies to watch them blind. I try really hard not to pick up my phone during it. I certainly don't Google anything while I'm watching it. I might answer my phone if I have some like messages or something, but I don't Google anything. I try not even to look at the back of the box before I watch it. Halfway through the movie, I was like, I have no clue how the heck I'm supposed to summarize this, because the whole point of this summary segment is to make me look like an asshole, which I think is fun for people. Kind of point and laugh like you're watching Jerry Springer or something. And the other point is, if for some ridiculous reason you're listening to this show and you've never seen The Godfather 2, I'm going to do my best to explain the movie in a very short way so that maybe you get some context for what I'm talking about. Trust me, if you've never seen The Godfather 2 and you listen to my presumably terrible summary of it, it's not going to help you at all. But hey, here we go. So the movie starts out with, I believe it starts out in, because it starts out first, you get like a shot of Michael and he's looking all Godfather-y, but that's like the first like 30 seconds in the movie, and then bam, it hits you with flashbacks immediately. Immediately it's like, okay, it's 1901, here's baby Vito Corleone. It gives you like some text exposition, which I feel like people like kind of encourage that to not be a thing, because it's like, oh, it's like lazy exposition. But there's something about like the beginning of a movie. You can just hit some people with with text and they'll eat it. And now they know everything they needed to know to give them context for what they're about to see. And it's fine. I mean, like famously, Star Wars opens with the text crawl. Here's something to kind of get you situated. So I was like pretty okay with this movie starting out with the text. You know, it starts off really intense. You got funeral scene. Okay, I might feel like I'm getting into the movie. Let's summarize. Flashback to the past. Baby Vito Corleone. His dad has just died. During his funeral, his brother gets killed. His mom goes to the guy that's killing these people, and she's like, spare my son, spare my son. And the guy's like, nah. So Vito Corleone, he runs off. His mom gets killed. He goes to America. Somehow, some people feel bad for him, I guess. You see him as a baby going through Ellis Island. Not a baby, he's 9. And you get this like cool immigration scene. And then I think it cuts back to Michael at that point, and he's kind of dealing with, they have like this big party that's very reminiscent of the wedding scene from the beginning. Not the beginning, the first movie. Shady backroom deals and stuff. It's like a really good juxtaposition. It feels different enough that it's not like any sort of like rip off or whatever. It plays a lot more like a nice homage to the first movie, and you kind of really get a feel for Al Pacino, Michael being like, I'm filling in Marlon Brando's shoes, I'm the Don now, and all that good stuff. I think the thing that's interesting about this movie is when you're doing like a summary, you really want to like hit the plot points, like plot here, this happens. But this movie's like so much about the themes and the drama of family and being an American immigrant and stuff like that. It's hard to summarize. Let's just say, for the purpose of this movie, you cut back and forth between Al Pacino playing Michael Corleone and you got Robert De Niro as Vito Corleone in the past, and it's just kind of juxtaposing their rise and fall. You got Vito coming in, having nothing, slowly rising up in the past to the point where he's got his family, he's established his family, he's in a good place. He eventually gets revenge on the guy that killed his father. It's really satisfying. And meanwhile, you got Michael. Things are kind of falling apart around his ears. He's doing his best to hold everything together, but people are betraying him left and right. He's trying to keep his head above water, all while trying to stay true to who he is. But again, just like the first movie where he kind of takes a dark turn and it kind of closes out with him like assassinating all the other families that oppose him, he kind of ends this movie by taking out everyone that wronged him throughout the movie, even if they're blood related, which is really interesting because in terms of like the themes of the movie, it's a lot to parse through. But suffice to say, you have a movie where a guy comes in, he's an Italian immigrant, Vito Corleone. He rises up through being super chill and in control to the point where he's looked upon and respected. And you got Michael Corleone, his son, who eventually replaced him, trying his best to follow in his father's footsteps, but having everything kind of crash around his ears because of all the, the failings of humans, and it ends. I mean, the ending of the movie is really sad. Quite frankly, if you haven't seen it, then go watch it. I mean, why are you listening to me summarize this stupid movie? Go watch it. It's great. It's fantastic. You don't need me to summarize it. There it is. Yeah. So the next thing I like to do is go through what I call my preconceived notions, where I write down everything that I knew about the movie going in. And boy, is my list short for this movie, because the zeitgeist of The Godfather, a lot of it has to do with that first movie where he's doing the, oh, I'll grant you this favor, this favor, this favor. Like, that's what gets parodied all the time. So going into this, having that already happen, there's only like a couple specific things where I was like, I feel like this has to happen in this movie because I'm like weirdly culturally aware of it. But it wasn't a lot. Top of my list, I got Fredo. I said in my first episode, I was like, I know Fredo betrays people. And so going into this, having watched the first one and been like, okay, he didn't betray anybody. This has got to be the movie where he betrays people. Turns out I was very right to assume that, but at the same time, I'm still very wrong in thinking that it was something that was going to happen in the first movie. And, having him survive into this movie, being the only blood brother that's still alive for Al Pacino, and having him betray him, it's a lot more tragic. I knew that there was a betrayal imminent, but at the same time, I didn't know how it was going to be handled. And I didn't know, necessarily how truly tragic it was going to be. I know something that I wrote down in my actual notes watching the movie is they actually don't play it too much like, oh, it's a big secret who betrayed Michael. Like, he goes, I need to figure out who betrayed me. And it cuts to literally Fredo in bed getting a phone call where it's like, oh, he's the one that betrayed him. Okay. It's so funny because this movie didn't have any idea what sort of expectations would be placed upon it in the future. So to see them handling this Fredo betrayal so smoothly and making it still so interesting, even if you know that he's the one that does it, it's strange. Like, it just feels so much like foresight that they were like, yeah, Fredo betrays him, but it's not about the shock of the betrayal. It's about like the human emotion behind it and stuff like that. And it just was still so satisfying to watch, going in and being like, this is like one of the 3 things I kind of know about this movie. It still was great to watch. I wasn't like, oh, I knew that was going to happen, and I felt all smug and stuff about it. It was fun to watch. I also knew that this movie involved flashbacks of some sort. I assumed that it had to do with Vito Corleone, because that was what would make sense, him coming to America and establishing his family, but I didn't really know what they consisted of. And I sure as shit didn't know Robert De Niro was the one that plays Vito Corleone in his 20s. That was a really fun moment where it just cuts to him, and I was like, oh my God, it's Robert De Niro. I was like, oh my God, it's 1917. Oh shit, he's he's Vito Corleone. Oh, okay, sweet. I'm on board for this. I like this. So I knew there was going to be flashbacks, but again, I have no idea how it was going to be handled. If it was just like a thing, like a chunk that happened, or if it was going to like go back and forth and stuff like that. Going in blind, I had no clue. I had a couple notes about who I thought would be returning in the movie. I wrote that obviously Pacino would be. I had this weird feeling that maybe Robert Duvall wouldn't be, although I don't know why that would happen, why he wouldn't come back for the next movie, but there was just this weird inkling I had that he wouldn't be back. Obviously that isn't true. I knew De Niro was involved in some way, but I had no idea in what capacity, so it was a pleasant surprise to see him playing such a big role and doing it so well, obviously. The one thing I do look at on the back of the box, I don't even read the summary because I don't want anything spoiled for me, but I do read the runtime to try to kind of get an idea for what I'm in for. And when I looked at the back of this, it said 202 minutes. And I went, fuck, that's a long time. So much so that I'm recording this on a different day than I had planned, because the day I wanted to record, I would have to go into work in the morning. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have had time to watch the movie, record an episode, and then be even somewhat remotely awake at work the next day. It would have been a nightmare. And so I put it off. I mean, this movie is very, very long, but I gotta say, you don't feel the runtime at all. It's so engaging the entire time. When you look at the clock when you're about to start the movie, and then you look at the clock when it's finally over, you do kind of have a sort of a Jaws push-in moment where you're like, I don't know where the last 4 hours of my life just went. What the actual hell? I did have questions about if Marlon Brando was going to be in this movie. Like I said before, I knew that there was flashbacks, but I wasn't entirely sure what they consisted of. So there was a part of me that was like, hey, maybe they did the flashbacks so they could bring Marlon Brando back, to play Vito Corleone. Even though he died in the first movie, hey, we'll do these flashbacks and you can kind of still see him being Marlon Brando in some scenes. So there was like a slight expectation going into this movie that I would see Marlon Brando again. Obviously, for those of you that have watched the movie, which is hopefully everyone that is listening to this episode, because why are you listening to this show if you haven't seen the movie? I'm not going to be the one that sells you on it. You should have watched it already. Don't be like me, kids. Don't be like me. Watch good movies. Just watch them. They're great. This movie's great. Thought I would see Marlon Brando again, but I didn't. He never shows up. There's even a scene where I was like, holy shit, he's definitely going to cameo at the end of this. And he doesn't. And I was kind of okay with it at that point. The end of the first movie, oh no, that's not true. I have one really big thing to tackle right after this, but they end the last movie with saying that they're going to move out to Vegas. So I had an expectation for them to be in Nevada, and they were. Although they weren't technically in Vegas, they hang out in Tahoe and go to Vegas when they need to. I knew they'd be in Nevada, and I was curious how that would play out. And even that is handled in an interesting way, because they're not in Vegas, they're in Tahoe, and then they go to lots of different places. Like the flashbacks are clearly New York, and then Michael goes to Miami, and then he goes to Havana. So the locales ended up being a little crazier than I expected as well, but I did foresee them going to Nevada. And lastly, I actually added this towards the end of the movie, but it kept being a thing where I was like, oh, Fredo's still alive. Oh, I know there's like a boat scene. There's like a boat scene where Fredo gets killed. I'm pretty sure that's what happens. And so, like, I kept being like, okay, Fredo, gotta do your boat scene now. And then it kept not happening. And then finally, like, right towards the end of the movie, he's like starting to like be weirdly into fishing and stuff. And I was like, okay, this is setting up the boat scene. Here it comes. And then finally, at the very end of the movie, when they're knocking off all the people that fucked Michael over, his bodyguard takes Fredo out. And I'm like, okay, here it comes. And then, sure enough, it gets whacked. So I did obviously see that coming. But again, the movie, it's so weird. Like, I wonder, I'd be very curious what the thought processes were when they were making this movie. Because there's all these moments that made its way into the cultural zeitgeist and that I'm like kind of aware of, but the movie doesn't even play them like something that's like supposed to be shocking. This movie doesn't rely on shock that much at all. So the scene where Fredo gets killed, it's like very apparent what's about to happen, even if like you had never heard of it before, presumably watching it for the first time back in the year it was released. The way it builds up to it, especially the fact that two other people are killed on screen right before it happens, you know it's going to happen. That's what it's building towards. So, like, it's not about the shock of it. So even though I was like, oh, there's a boat scene where Fredo gets killed, it's not about that he gets killed. It's just about the tragedy of it and the watching the final, downswing of Michael's arc, presumably. I guess fun fact, I might never actually watch The Godfather 3. Obviously the nature of this show is I watch movies that I've never seen before that are considered classics. I use air quotes for that because, again, I'll probably grossly stretch that definition, but it's generally agreed upon that the third Godfather movie is not great. If I get desperate, maybe I'll go back and visit it as like a movie I review, but in terms of watching it for this show, I don't know. I don't know if I could reasonably do an episode on it because it's not considered a classic. Everyone seems to revile it. I don't know why. I've never seen it. I might never watch it anyway. I don't know why I got off on that tangent. I had something to do with Michael's arc. I don't know. Is he in the Godfather 3? Is Al Pacino in Godfather 3? Does he have more character stuff in that? I don't know. It seems like Godfather 2 kind of ends on a downer, but it's like, yeah, this is where we're at. I guess I can see the potential for more. I'm pretty sure the third one was made years and years after the fact. I assume that's probably also why it's not so good, because who knows who they even got back for that movie, how many people they had to kill off screen. But hey, I rambled enough about that. Let's get on to my actual review of the movie. Again, I felt like doing the first episode, it was a lot more interesting when I got into some of my, oh man, in the moment reactions in the movie, as opposed to like, as a film critic, the thing that I appreciate about this movie is the composition of the shots. You have one guy in the corner it's The Godfather 2. It's one of the most beloved movies in cinema ever. People know that it's fucking good. They know why it's good. They know the depth of it. They know it's well made. And again, watching this movie, I realized something. I was like, the nature of this show, this whole thing where I'm like, oh yeah, I watched the movie and then I immediately jump on the mic afterwards and give my fresh thoughts. I realized that it's going to really open me up for potential criticism should anybody ever listen to this show, which they shouldn't. But hey, if they do, they'll be like, this fucking asshole doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. I stress, I am recording this. I just watched it. I haven't had time to marinate on the themes of the movie and all that good stuff. These first two movies, maybe they were bad choices. These are movies that beg rewatching. The depth of them, even just watching it for the first time, I'm just amazed at like how much there is to dig into, because these are huge movies, like thematically. There's so much to tackle. It's not just like a movie that has like this sort of singular message. It's tackling so much: immigration, family, morality. There's big themes at play, and I'll never have enough time to delve into all of it. But that's part of the fun of the show, is it's not so much about me explaining my thoughts as a film critic, so to speak. It's been done before. It's been done, and it's been done better by tons of people. I'm here to talk to you about what it was like to experience these things for the first time. That's what I want to focus on. And I'll get into some of the fun nuances and stuff as I talk, but I'm going to try to focus on stuff like that. Something I noticed right off the bat, I was like, oh, they kind of emphasized that this movie was based on a novel this time around. I can't remember in the first one if they specifically are like, that's Mario Puzo. He's the guy that wrote the book, and he also helped with the screenplay. It was interesting because I genuinely forgot that this series is based on a novel, which is interesting because I feel like I haven't read the novel, so obviously I have no idea, but I feel like the fact that this series is based on novels or a novel, I don't know, definitely adds to the weight of the movies because these characters feel very lived in. They feel like there was a lot of thought put into them, and they do a good job of translating that to the screen. It just feels like the actors have a really good grasp on who their characters are. And it's the kind of stuff you can get from a novel where you can just explain Michael was in the war and this is how it felt when he was in the war and this is what he's all about. On screen, you have to try to figure out how to visually represent that. But in a novel, you can just blather on about it. I think that adds a lot. Again, not that I read the novels, but the characters feel so lived in, feel like that's the kind of thing that comes from a novel. And I was interested that it kind of mentioned that at the beginning of the movie. You see Michael and he's all like, I'm the Godfather now. And then it's just based on a novel, The Godfather, and all that good stuff. I was pretty blown away by the beginning of the movie, the flashbacks. You have the funeral scene and then gunshots ring out and then boom, kid's dead. So you got dead dad, dead older brother. They go to the Don. She's trying to be like, don't kill my son. And the guy's like, no, I'm killing your son. And she pulls a knife on the guy, tells him to run. I was like, all of that was, whoa. That was shocking. I mean, obviously, I had no idea any of that was coming. But even just seeing it for the first time, I felt like my jaw was hanging open. It was freaking intense. I had no idea where it was going. I genuinely, when it was happening, I was like, oh, she'll ask for a pardon and he'll be like, all right, I'm going to raise this kid as my own. And he'll grow up here in Italy and he'll learn the trade and he'll eventually take me down or whatever. But it was just pulls a fucking knife on the dude and Vito runs off and takes a ship to America just like that. I was like, oh, okay, movie. I wasn't expecting any of that. I guess here we go. You get Vito going to Ellis Island, and he gets his name just so nonchalantly. I think part of the fun of watching these movies for the first time is how these things that are so infamous, like Vito Corleone, that name is everything, especially in the first movie. And then you watch the second movie, and it's so throwaway how he gets his name. He's just, oh, your name's Vito, and you're from Corleone. Here you go. There's your name. Boom, done. It just happens so fast, and then they follow up almost immediately with that really famous shot. At least I feel like it's famous, of him looking out the window and you see the reflection of the Statue of Liberty, and it's just stuff like that where I'd love to spend a long time kind of ruminating on the sort of thematic weight of seeing the shots, because there's a lot of stuff about being poor and being an immigrant that's woven into this movie. But again, I'm not here to be that guy. It's been done before. It's been done better. Like I said, I just want to say it was a cool shot. I really appreciated it when it happened, and it was fun. Baby Vito. And then I made a note of what the time was, because I didn't know if I guess I assumed that we were going to go back and see Baby Vito some more. So I was like, oh, 1901. And then it cuts to 1958 back with Michael. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to keep track of the dates and follow this story. And so, yeah, I wrote down 1901, and then turns out I did it for no reason. But hey, but then you get back to Michael and you got that big party scene, that the sort of echo of the first movie, where instead of a wedding, you have this what were they even having? It's it wasn't a bar mitzvah or anything like that, because they're not Jewish. It was, why were they celebrating the kids? What did the kid, he was like, I genuinely can't remember. His kid was, it's his birthday or something. I don't know. I actually literally have no idea thinking back on it. But you get that clearly evil senator guy and the whole thing. And it was interesting because obviously the nature of that scene was to kind of offer a juxtaposition between how Marlon Brando handled stuff like that versus like how Al Pacino's character is handling stuff like that. When Marlon Brando was like at the party, he was like putting on like such a face and being happy with everybody, meeting, congratulating, smiling as much as frumpy Marlon Brando can smile and greeting people. And then you got Al Pacino out there and he's just frowning and he looks shitty as fuck the entire time. Doesn't look like he's having any fun. And then you get the same sort of backroom dealings as Marlon Brando did. And it's like just the tone of the conversation is so different. And it's really interesting. It's the same, like you're seeing the same scene, but it's like the tone of it is the first thing you see is this senator trying to kind of push his weight around on Michael and not taking Michael very seriously. And Michael's just kind of like looking at him. I think the thing about Michael versus Vito is Vito is very calculating and he's good at reading people, but he also, I feel like he's almost like more theatrical in a way. He will push people in the room and he'll say the things he needs to say in order to make his point, and he'll appeal to emotion a little bit. And Michael, he just kind of stares at the senator guy while he's rambling, and he just has this like look in his eyes. Like the thing in these movies is like I almost want to like go back and maybe watch some of the Al Pacino movies I missed, not even missed, but even some of the stuff I've seen before, and like kind of reevaluate how he is in some movies. Like go back and watch Jack and Jill. I'm just kidding. It's a terrible movie. Don't watch it. I live in a world where I had seen Jack and Jill before I ever saw the Godfather movies, which is pretty sad. But his just like facial acting in these movies is so good. You just see him kind of breaking the senator down in his mind and just calculating all of his moves. He's very cunning in that way. And I feel like the movie tries to make a point of being like, yeah, and he learned this from his dad. And his dad is very calculating, but his dad also was old school. He like came from a world where you operated out of like respect to people and you trusted people and had confidence in them. You had a family and it was all about like a network of people, stuff like that. And Michael, he just feels so much more isolated in this movie in terms of can't trust anybody. I got to do what I got to do to make sure everything goes right. And I think just early on you have this scene in it. And again, I'm not trying to delve super deep into like the thematic stuff, but just right from the outset, I was watching it and I was just like, oh, this just feels different. It obviously wasn't the exact same scene, but like it was, the whole point of it was to put it in there and like see the juxtaposition between Michael in this movie and Vito in the first movie. Right off the bat, it's just so apparent about how their approach to the game essentially is so different. And even just having watched it for the first time, I just noticed it immediately. I was just like, wow, like the tone, it just gets off on the right foot immediately. Like I said, I think this episode's going to be a little bit longer probably than the first one because there's so much to cover. But I'm going to speed through some of these next notes because a lot of them are just like, I didn't know who was coming back to the movie. So when they would appear on screen, I'd write their name with like an exclamation point. I was really excited to see Talia Shire again. I want to go back and like look up some of her IMDb or something like that and like figure out what other movies she's been in. Cause like she's obviously been in the Rocky movies and she was in these movies and she's just like really good. She doesn't get to really be in the Godfather movies that much. She tends to have like 2 or 3 scenes, like one at the beginning, and then she'll show up like towards the end and be like, hey, I'm still around. But she just brings like such a weight to the character, and she looks great as like a sort of rich princess type, like wealthy and shiny and stuff. I really like that scene when she comes to Michael in the back room because this movie does a lot of Michael in the shadows type stuff. That was something I noticed like immediately. There's just scenes where they're like, you can even barely see his face. And then like whoever he's talking to is like all lit up. And obviously it's trying to kind of show the darkness of his character visually and stuff like that. But I'm always interested in movies that are ballsy enough to just put characters almost completely in shadow to where you can't even see them. Because I feel like it's a lot of people's like natural instinct when they're making a movie. It's like, you got to throw light on them, got to see their faces and stuff like that. In this movie, like Coppola's like, nah, you know who it is. you know exactly who it is, and you're just gonna watch it anyway because it's fucking scary. And yeah, but yeah, I just was excited when people would show up. Duvall showed back up. I assumed he would, but it was nice to see him. He does a great job, of course. This movie was interesting because you have all these like big actors, and like a lot of them show up at the beginning, but they don't really get like a big scene. But then like eventually, like everyone gets like their turn. Talia Shire, like her initial scene, she gets a little bit to do, but then she shows back up and she has like a really good scene with Michael. When Michael's handing over the family to Robert Duvall, Robert Duvall gets a really good scene with Al Pacino. And then later, Fredo gets a really good scene with Al Pacino. And then I was pretty concerned about Kay. It's kind of fucked up that she's the one actress whose name I can't really remember. Like every time the credits rolled, I would be like, oh, her, I know that name. But it escapes me at the moment, and I'm not going to look it up. I was concerned because she's just like kind of sidelined in this movie. And then, boy, oh boy, does she sure have a scene that happens later. But the movie's not afraid to not do a scene without Michael in it, in the like the present day stuff. But for the most part, like all the present day stuff just revolves around Michael. Like every big scene that the character has is in opposition to Al Pacino in this movie. And I think that's a real testament to his acting as well. Because obviously he brings it in the scenes, but there's scenes where like that scene with like Talia Shire at the end, like I think what she like talks, she does all the talking for a while. And he just sits there and he finally just kind of cups her chin and says, Connie. And that's it. Like, holy crap. Just the restraint. God, Al Pacino, damn. Like, I don't know Academy Awards for that time period and anything like that. And honestly, maybe back in the day it meant a lot more. I don't put a lot of stock in the Oscars anymore. I think it's become kind of a crapshoot in terms of who wins what, and the board is just voting out of control. Like that year that Straight Outta Compton and Creed got snubbed so hard just broke me. I was like, I don't care about the Oscars anymore. It's a shit show. It's just Creed. The fact that Ryan Coogler wasn't nominated, that movie's so well directed. I am off on a crazy tangent. I'm going to pull back on that. But I just wanted to say, like, the performances in this movie are truly incredible. I'd be kind of at a loss if Al Pacino wasn't at least like nominated for this movie, because not even just the scenes where he has to bring it, the scenes where he has to be there and let characters bounce off of him, like that's true skill to be able to do something like that. And he just does it almost effortlessly, flawlessly. He's just his face and his body posture, it's just incredible, truly incredible. And now I've officially talked way longer than I meant to about just the initial characters being introduced. But it was exciting. It was exciting to have just watched the first movie a week ago. And then I was already happy when the characters were coming back, you know? I already talked a lot about the shadows and the backroom stuff. And I'm going to jump ahead to something that was pretty, like, as soon as it happened, I was like, well, duh. Like, somewhere deep in my mind, I knew that this is what it was, but it cuts to 1917 and you just see a guy in the window, and I was like, oh man, I think that's De Niro. And I went, oh fuck. I was like, De Niro's fucking Vito Corleone. Why did I not remember that? Like somewhere deep in my head I knew it, but I got so giddy when I saw it. I was like, yes, it's so perfect. Like, oh, him playing the young Marlon Brando. It's why did I not remember this? But I'm so glad I didn't, because I get to just experience the joy of coming to that realization. Just, oh man, and he just crushes this movie. It's truly incredible. Like, he doesn't even talk that much, especially in English, but when he does, he just channels Brando so well. His I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse. Like, it's funny, he's like still De Niro, but he shifts just enough to where you're like, that's also Brando. I see the shades of what this guy becomes so well. Oh God, it was so good. I feel like I'm not gonna spend a ton of time on the flashback stuff with De Niro, because it's all great, but it is pretty, it's not simplistic. I'd never say simplistic, but it's pretty, I guess what I mean is not a lot of his stuff is built upon like surprises and like what's going to happen. You know, like obviously, you know, he's not going to die. He grows up to be Marlon Brando. And even like Clemenza, you know, he's not going to die because like Clemenza becomes like his dude later in life. So like, you know, there's like the good tension moments. There's the scene where they're robbing the rug out of that place, and you're like, oh shit, is Clemenza about to like shoot a cop? And I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to think that that would be a thing that happens. So I was sitting in my chair, clenching my butthole a little bit, like, oh, how south is this about to go? Like, okay, you walked away, and I was like, whew, you know, just I'm curious how that scene plays for people that have seen the movie a bunch of times. Like, is it still? It's obviously well shot, but you know, it's stuff like that where I feel like me being someone who's just watched it for the first time, I could speak to the fact that it still really works that first time. I had no clue what direction it was going, and I was just sitting there like, no, don't open the door. Don't. Oh, okay, he walked away. Oh, thank Christ. Like, okay, that's good. You know, same thing with the scene where he goes to talk to the guy that's sort of the Don of the town to, you know, make him an offer he can't refuse. He gives him the $100, and I didn't know how that scene was going to play out. Like, you almost think maybe it's going to be he sits down and, you know, just kills. They're technically alone in the shop. Like, it's not unreasonable, I think, to assume that maybe De Niro's just going to take him out right there. And so when the guy's like, I like your style, and just kind of bones out, you're like, oh, okay. And then you get obviously the really great scene where De Niro just kind of tracks him through the city, through the parade, and all that good stuff, which is obviously well shot. And that's, again, the thing where some of the fun, I think, of this movie comes in. Some of the, again, I don't even know if it was foresight, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, De Niro's stalking this guy and he's going to go kill him. It's not really a question of if it's going to happen. It's just a really well shot scene that properly builds the tension. The tension and the sort of drive towards the inevitable a lot is like what a lot of these scenes are based around. These things where you're like, this is the conclusion that it's driving towards, but it sure is a beautiful scenic route that they take to get to it. And it's always satisfying still when it finally happens. You just watch De Niro stalking along, jumping around, and you're like watching this fucking guy pretend to be a big shot in the city, and you're just like just the more you watch it, the more you're just like, fuck this guy. This guy fucking sucks. I can't wait till De Niro shoots him in the face, and you're just like watching it, and you're like, oh, this guy. And then even when they're in the house, it's still kind of like, oh, shoot him. Oh, he's not. Oh, and then he finally shoots him. You're just like, yes. It feels so satisfying to watch, and it's just so well done. And I think that is like the last we see of De Niro, I believe, in the movie, is he kills that guy, kind of walks through the parade, which I remember making a note. I like almost kind of the irony of this Jesus parade going on while De Niro walks through the town. I just realized that isn't the last time we see De Niro, but it's like they're almost like inadvertently celebrating that he took out this corrupt figure in there that was keeping them all down. And, you know, he's just walking there and there's fireworks and celebratory music, and you get that great scene where he's sitting on the steps with all his kids and his family, and you're just like, yeah, that's great. But obviously that's not the last we see of him, because then later we get to see him kind of being a Don. You get the great scene with the landlord who figures out who he is and about pees his pants. That's just so well done. Again, like some of the comedy that they weave into these movies, I believe is what I was trying to say. Some of the comedy they weave in with him trying to leave, the tension, but it's also funny because the guy is like so scared, and they're just so bemused while they watch it. And you know, and like there's like a part of me that's watching it. I was like, are they actually going to kill this guy? The two guys are standing outside the store. They seem like they're kind of just working on the storefront, but they're also guarding it a little bit, maybe preventing the guy from leaving. I was like, is this guy dead? Like, I was like, I don't know how hardcore Vito is in his younger days. Like if he's kind of a chop all the heads of the guys who wrong me off type or not, but I think it's fun. You really kind of get on his side because you just see that he's, compassionate, and he's not sort of a burn the earth and salt the ground type. He is there to like build a good reputation, and he knows the power of it, what that can mean about how he doesn't really have to do violent acts, because he'll do it when he needs to, but only when he really needs to. And if you are treating people with the proper respect, then you don't gotta die. And it does a great job of, you see his approach to running things, and obviously the whole point is you're kind of comparing it to how Michael's running things, and you can kind of see the ways in which Michael goes wrong through that. And then I believe the last thing you do get is him going to Italy, meeting with the Don guy, who of course is still alive, and I was like, oh boy, I have no idea where this is going. Presumably he's there to take him out, but I don't know. He is in the guy's compound, so it'd be kind of hard, but sure enough, he leans in and says who his father is, and then just dead. Just slices that fat fucker open, and oh god, that was satisfying, because that guy was... It's just such a amazing crystallization of how big and yet how focused on this specific group of people this movie is. Like, these two people are essentially like the kings of their respective like underground worlds, and they meet, and yet it all comes down to this personal grudge of, you killed my entire family and now I'm finally going to take you out. And I don't even get the feeling that Vito was like, oh, I'm going to become a Don in America and then I'll come back and kill this guy. That obviously wasn't his big plan, but he never forgot about what that guy did to him, and you realize that probably was something that was driving him. This corrupt guy really shaped Vito's worldview, where he was just like, I'll never be that guy. I'll never let that guy exist in a world where I exist and I can do something about it. Really powerful stuff, and also extremely satisfying. It was really fun to watch De Niro gut that guy. And then they ride around on the train and get that last shot of Say Goodbye, Michael, which, again, I feel like that's a moment where if I had a year to study this movie, I could really like parse out the meaning behind all of it. But just seeing it for the first time, it still felt really powerful and poignant as I was watching it. And I believe they replay that shot at a certain point in the movie. And it was, oh man, it was good. And speaking of De Niro versus Pacino, something I was interested in going into this movie. Like I said before, I knew that De Niro was involved with the movie, and so I was kind of like, oh, if De Niro's in The Godfather and Pacino's in The Godfather, like the thing I always knew about the movie Heat was supposedly it was like this big thing. Oh, Pacino and De Niro are finally facing off on screen after all this time, and I was like, are they? Because aren't they both in The Godfather together? And then obviously once I realized De Niro was playing Vito Corleone in the past, I was like, obviously, okay, they're never going to meet on screen in this movie because they're in completely different timelines. So it started to make a lot of sense. It's just a fun little thing where I love the movie Heat. Having seen The Godfather now, I'm like, oh, I get what the hype was about. Vito Corleone's meeting Michael Corleone in a movie and they're facing off. Like I see now like why that was such a big deal. So that was fun. But getting back to Michael / Al Pacino, his whole story, he's really all over the place in this movie. He goes to Vegas, and then he goes to Miami, and then he goes to Havana, and then he's just everywhere in this movie. And again, I feel like with him, there's so much to dig into about his character, about the family versus isolation and stuff like that. I even wrote a note because obviously when he's in Cuba, he's dealing with like the rebels and stuff like that. And there's like a mention of Fidel, and there's something there obviously with the military guy trying to take down the rich, powerful people in control versus putting it up against Michael's own journey in America and stuff like that. And again, because I'm trying to just be fresh, I don't have the time to really kind of get into what the meaning of all that is. But even just watching it for the first time, I was like, oh, there's so much here. It was interesting. I was like, oh man, Fidel, the fucking revolution's happening all around them. So when it kind of all comes to a head, I was like, oh man, like kind of saw where this was going, but it still was just like so intense when it happens. In the first episode, I specifically mentioned that I knew that like Fredo was a traitor, and the whole first movie I kept waiting for that moment to happen. And then in this movie, when he's on a warpath, like, I know someone betrayed me, I was like, I know it was Fredo. It's like the one thing I know about these movies. And then the I'm not going to quite say it takes it away from me, but I'm sitting there feeling kind of like almost smug about the one thing I know. And it's like, I know someone betrayed me. And then it cuts to a shot of Fredo. And I was like, really? But it's like, oh, did they make it that obvious? And then he literally gets a phone call that's like, hey, Fredo, it's me, the guy that works for Roth. Was just checking up on how our betrayal's coming along, and I was like, oh my god, they don't even like play it like it's a mystery. They just give it to you. This whole time I was like, the one knowledge tidbit I knew about the movie that I thought gave me a slight leg up, they're like, no, we make it obvious. It's not about the mystery, it's about the tragedy. And that's something this movie just does so well, and it's so satisfying, like even all these years later, to watch it with like a couple things like technically spoiled for me. They're not even really spoilers. Things that, because I knew they were going to happen, I was able to just appreciate them on another level instead of having to wade through my shock initially. It's like, I already knew that was going to happen, and now I can just appreciate this moment for what it is. And it was just handled so well. And the guy that plays Fredo, just like almost everybody else in this movie, he turns in a truly good performance. He's it's very sympathetic character, but still, weaselly and shitty to the point where you're like, yeah, this guy sucks. Your brother sucks, but then you feel bad for him. That's the kind of role that I feel like a lot of people don't appreciate. If you're just sort of a casual moviegoer, you might just be like, yeah, Fredo sucks. Fredo sucks. I'm glad he got shot on the boat. Fuck that guy. But you got to appreciate a performance like that, a guy that's like willing to take that character there. I feel bad for not memorizing his name, but he does such a good job. But to backtrack a little bit, I forgot, I wrote this note down. Pacino has that line about keep your friends close and enemies closer. That was something I made a note of because I'm always interested in where sayings came from, and perhaps this is me showing my ignorance, but this movie is old enough and popular enough that I wouldn't be super surprised if that's where the saying came from. I found that curious. Again, I don't Google anything before I do the show, but I was like, I wonder if that came from this. Or even if it didn't originate it, maybe it at least popularized it. I thought that was pretty interesting. There's a scene where, so Michael's going around, and this is the part where I got a little bit lost because I don't know, having never seen the movie, who is actually betraying who. Like, obviously they make it kind of obvious early on that Roth is up to no good, but then you're supposed to also think the really gruff mustache guy, I'm not even going to make an attempt at pronouncing his last name because I didn't write it down. It's like Pantiglione or Pantig. See, this is what I do. I say I'm not going to do something and I do it anyway and make a complete ass of myself. But you know who I'm talking about, the guy that they bring to the bar. He's trying to fight against the Rosado family. And so the scene that I didn't like, and again, maybe it's something that makes more sense if you've like watched the movie a couple times and you can kind of, maybe there's like something I missed. He goes to the bar, and then I was like, I remember being like, oh man, this looks exactly like the bar where they strangle that one guy in the first movie. And I wrote the note death bar because I was like, this guy's dead. And they come up and they try to strangle him, and they're like, Michael Corleone sends his regards. And I was like, what? I was like, so was it not Roth and it actually was this guy? I was like, whose side is Michael on? Like, having never seen the movie, them saying that, I was like, okay, so that guy did betray Michael, or at least Michael thinks he did, and he's trying to have him killed. But then like later, maybe if I missed something, I feel like they're insinuating that no, it was Roth that tried to kill him, but they were saying that Michael sends his regards because why? Like, presumably, unless that was, again, maybe this is what it was and I missed something. Was that a setup? Was the whole point to try to kill Frank, but fail in quotations? Like, was the cop a plant? Was that just a fake assassination attempt to turn that guy against Michael? Was that the point? Like, was that what they were doing? Because, like, eventually the guy turned state witness, and, like, it seemed like Roth had planned that all along, I guess. So, like, was that the point? Were they just pretending to kill the guy? They were going to kill him, and then Roth was like, go to strangle him, but then the cop will interrupt, and you guys all run out, and then he'll hate Michael, and that'll be good for us. If that's what it was, then yeah, that's a pretty clever plan, but it was hard for me to kind of understand if that's actually what they were going for, or if it was just supposed to be like and tell him Michael did it because fuck him, I guess. And then because the echoes of that are huge. And if that was part of Roth's plan, then yeah, that is cool, I guess. But if it's not, boy, is that shitty. And like I said, I'll probably show my ignorance a lot while I'm talking about this movie, having only seen it once and not been able to like go back and see if there's anything I missed. But that was a part that threw me off. Like, I spent a major chunk of Michael's storyline being like, I don't know where this is going, because there's a lot of like him trying to parse out rats and figure out who screwed him over and deal with them and stuff like that. Like with Roth, I felt like Michael was insinuating that Roth was faking his illness, but then it seemed like he was actually sick. So I had a really hard time telling, because like I almost expected in the hospital, like once the nurse left, for him to like kind of sit up and like take his nose thing out and be like, yeah, I was all right the whole time. I just wanted to hang out in the hospital because I knew shit was going to go down at like the president's house or something like that. But no, he seems to be genuinely messed up. He had like an actual stroke. So that was a little confusing, at least for me as a first time watcher. Not that any of it remotely ruined the movie by any stretch. It's just little things like that where I'm curious for people, like, is it something that you get so used to it that you stop even like really thinking about it, or is it a thing where I'm just ignorant and I'm missing something completely obvious because I've only seen the movie the one time? It's just a thought. I'd be curious what people think about my thoughts on that, like if I'm coming off stupid right now, or if it's something that maybe you've kind of forgotten about over time because you know where the story is going. You don't really get hung up on little details like that. But I was trying my best to follow along in the moment, and in the moment, like there's a point where I just wrote, I'm so confused. And I usually pride myself on being able to kind of keep up with stuff like that. But yeah, there was just a point where I was like, I am at a loss for where this is going. It just takes like a major time jump and suddenly they're in court on trial, but it doesn't seem to be a huge time jump. But then again, it does. Michael seems a lot older, but in terms of like where the story's at, it doesn't make a lot of sense for a ton of time to have passed. That was like, I think we can be honest here and say that's just a little bit confusing. Unless there's like a newspaper clipping that tells you, like, the movie isn't scared of giving you like a 1958. Like, I would have appreciated something like that when it cuts to the trial. If it was like 1961, I'd be like, okay, it's been 3 years. His kids are older. Like, you don't even see the kids enough to like get a feel for, and like he has a daughter, I guess. I thought he only had the son, and suddenly he has a daughter, and she seems kind of older, but his son still doesn't seem that old. I'm sorry. I'm not disparaging the movie. It was fucking fantastic, but there's like the little things, just trying my best to keep up with what's going on. I was at a total loss at that point. Although I guess I'm assuming now that I'm thinking about it, like if he has a daughter, like I always knew that Sofia Coppola was involved with the third Godfather movie. So is she Michael's daughter, like grown up in that movie? That would make sense, right? I'm almost interested to watch that movie now, though, because I actually am a really big Sofia Coppola fan. Just as a director, Lost in Translation is like one of my favorite movies of all time. And I even went and saw The Beguiled, A, because Colin Farrell is one of my favorite actors, and B, because I really like Sofia Coppola's style. That movie was fine. I kind of want to watch it again with subtitles. Fun fact, I don't think I've said this yet, but I am actually 50% deaf in both of my ears. I think maybe I did mention that because there's foreign languages in this movie, but yeah, watching movies in theaters sometimes is a little rough for me because The Beguiled is a very, very soft-spoken, whispery movie, like most of Sofia Coppola's movies are. I feel like I missed so much watching that movie. It was really enjoyable, and the performances were freaking amazing. At the same time, I was like, I am missing major chunks of dialogue here. Yeah, I mean, if you like Sofia Coppola, it's very much in line with some of the other stuff she's done. I haven't watched Marie Antoinette, but I assume that there's like some real comparisons to be made there, not even just because Kirsten Dunst is in both movies, but yeah, a little Sofia Coppola rant for no reason. Maybe I will watch the third Godfather movie, though. I'm kind of curious now. And I'd say, just to round out the last chunk of my, I guess, criticisms of the movie, my very light criticisms of a borderline perfect movie, the cake scene with Roth, where he's delving out his properties to all the people while simultaneously cutting a cake. I was like, man, I don't know about this. I was like, it's so well shot, but at the same time, I was like, even just watching it for the first time, I was like, this is on the nose. Like, holy crap. If there's like metaphors that are woven in there to where you've watched the movie a dozen times and I mean, it's not great if it takes you like a dozen times to finally pick up on something, but something that obvious. But like, this movie's so brilliant. It's like, is that the point? Is Rock literally like, yeah, I'm going to cut the cake in you guys' faces while I delve out my properties, because that's just how much of a big swinging dick I am. Like, that's how important I am. So even just talking about it, like, where I was going to kind of lay some criticism on it for like the bluntness of the metaphor, it feels like that was the point, even just speaking out loud about it. So I don't know. Again, trouble with this is I don't do any research, and I'm just giving you my fresh opinions. I just remember thinking while it happened, I was like, wow, really? What the fuck? I was like, that's not very subtle, but you know, that probably was the point. I'm more willing to assume that Coppola knew what he was doing, as opposed to being like, oh yeah, he probably thought that was so clever, but it's not. No, I mean, the guy's clearly a genius. So yeah, I'm willing to chalk that one up to that was the point. I retract that as a criticism. It was a good scene though. Great scene. Beautifully shot. Like even the cake, like you're like looking at the cake, you're like, that looks like some good ass cake actually. Like that's like, oh wow, that's such a fat thing to say, but yeah, I don't know. It looked like good cake, good yellow cake. All right, I'm gonna try to bullet point it in terms of like the stuff that really got a rise out of me. Like I said, if you're listening to this, you've probably seen the movie already. You don't need me to explain the moments to you. But really satisfying moment during New Year's when Michael grabs Fredo and kisses him on the mouth and just has his face in his hands. He's like, I know it was you. You broke my heart. I was like, oh, man. It's so funny, that moment. It's like, as soon as it happened, I was like, fuck, I know this moment somehow. It's so weird how that weaves its way into the culture and the media to the point where I'm like, I feel like I know this scene, but it still was so powerful to watch. You broke my heart. Oh God, it was so good. Man, I really enjoyed seeing that. But I want to jump way ahead to towards the end of the movie. The moment this movie's 3.5 hours long, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a watch. You don't feel the length. It goes by really fast, but I was starting to slouch a little bit while I was watching it. And then Michael finally gets that scene with Kay. I was like, okay, finally this scene's going to happen where Kay gets to kind of lay down what she's feeling, you know? And he's just like, I know you feel bad about the miscarriage. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then she just goes, no, it wasn't a miscarriage. It was an abortion. I was like, what the fuck? I wrote just all capital letters on my notepad, just abortion, exclamation point, and then just WTF, WTF, WTF. I was fucking floored. I sat straight up in my chair. My jaw actually dropped open. I was borderline in shock for the rest of that scene. I did not see that coming, not from a mile away. That shit hit me like a freight train. And she just says, I'm not going to bring another monster. And I don't think she says monster, but not going to bring another boy into the world. Oh, wow. I don't even know what to say. That was truly shocking. The biggest shock of the entire movie for me, honestly, was that scene. I didn't see it coming, and it was just so horrific to watch. It was unbelievable. And then the scene even goes on for a while after that. You know, he eventually smacks her, but that was intense. I didn't know how to handle that when that first happened, and it was just such a crystallizing moment of seeing Michael's character reflected off this woman he's been like kind of abusing for a long time, and you know, her being so close to the source. The movie's finally like, look at this guy. He's a monster. He's become an evil person who's just willing to kill to get what he wants and stuff. And she views him as so evil that she needs to literally take away his offspring, even though it's part her as well. That's just, man, I mean, like, what was this movie like? It's still the 70s, maybe? I mean, maybe it was like the early 80s when they made it. I didn't actually check the date, but how something like that to be in a movie from so long ago, just this nuclear bomb that they set off towards the end of the movie. I was blown away when that happened. It took me a while to recover from that. That's gonna stick in my memory for a long time. And certainly that was something that had not been spoiled for me, like, in the slightest. Like, I don't even know how you begin to approach spoiling that topic. Like, oh yeah, the scene where Kay's like, no, I aborted your baby. Not necessarily, as far as I know. It's also nothing that's been like parodied before, thank God, hopefully. But that destroyed me. I was just in shock. I feel like I can't even like properly talk about it because, like, just going back to that moment mentally in my head of when it hit me, I didn't know what to think. I was just, wow. And then I think I got two more things to touch on. You get the sort of the echoes of the first movie, that montage where Michael takes out everybody that fucked him over again, but this time it's obviously a little more personal. Roth gets killed. Frank is encouraged to slit his own wrists, which I was going to get into, like, the stuff with his brother, but I'm not going to because the point was made. I wanted to be like, oh, what was the deal with his brother? They never explained it. But I mean, like, I got it. I understood what they were doing. It's fine. I don't need it explained further. The point was made. Great bathtub slitting your wrist thing. That's a mafia suicide. It's good stuff. And then, like I said before, I knew the boat thing was going to happen, but just even again, the way they build up to it, it's so tragic. You see Fredo like really bonding with Michael's son towards the end over fishing and stuff. And then as soon as I saw him in fishing gear, I was like, oh yeah, the boat thing. Oh no. And then when his son was in the boat for a second, I was like, oh, is the son going to be there when they kill Fredo? And then they call him away. And I was like, okay, thank God the kid's not going to be there. But yeah, even just the way they set up the thing where to catch a fish, he says like, Hail Mary. And then they're out on the boat. And they're far away, a lot like they were for the first movie when the guy's in the car and the guy rises up behind him and shoots him in the head. Far away, he's saying Hail Mary, see the gun come into frame, and just bang, done. And I was just like, man, like, again, the movie's not about shocking you. It's about like building you towards these inevitable points and still making them feel visceral and satisfying. It's a real meta thing with the movie where the way they use tension and build up in the movie and that feeling of inevitability, it's echoes of what you're watching these characters go through. You're watching the tragic inevitability of Michael Corleone becoming this almost demonic figure in order to like keep his power. And it's sad because you're watching him slide and you want him to pull out of it. And it's like so tragic, but there's a part of you that knows he isn't. And there's a part of you that feels terrible for Fredo. And you're like almost fantasizing about a world where he turns around and knocks the gun out of the guy's hand or the guy decides not to shoot him, but that's just how this has to end. And it's tragic. And the whole movie is a real Shakespearean tragedy. And it's so effective. And it's really satisfying to have watched this for the first time. And even though I'm watching it like 40, 50 years after the fact, knowing how some of these things go, it's not about the shock. It's just about the sadness and the tragedy of it. And it's still very effective to this day, let me tell you, nostalgia free. And the last thing I want to talk about is obviously the last scene of the movie. I didn't know that the movie ends with a flashback to a dinner scene during Vito's birthday where all his kids are gathered around a table. Like, I mean, what is there to say about the scene that probably hasn't been said before? It's so good seeing all the characters, especially some of the ones that die, still gathered around a table and kind of interacting with each other. And like the anger that they have for Michael joining the army, it's so good because you know it's coming from this like genuine place. I'm sorry for saying like so much, by the way. I'm gonna try not to. My goal for this episode was to cut down on the cussing, but apparently I've replaced it with like. So I apologize for that. But he's angry at Michael to the point where he almost like hits him, because he cares about him so much and he doesn't want him going off to die for this country. Because again, like, I'm not going to talk about this scene too much because this is the scene that really brings all the themes of the movie together in this beautiful moment of, I'm going to go fight for my country versus family versus morality versus, it's all coming to a head in this scene. And I don't even begin to pretend I have the time to wade through all of that, but it's a truly beautiful scene. It's just so painful to watch when you're just, oh, what a powerful decision to close the movie out on that. Man, I was just, as soon as it started, I was like, oh no, don't do this to me. It hurt. It hurt real bad, but it was so good. Real bittersweet pain. Yeah, obviously I have to mention that because that's how the movie ends, but it was so good. All right, it's time for me to give my score for the movie. Not my musical score, but my number score. I mentioned in my first episode, which hopefully if you're listening to this, you've listened to the first one, but my scale on this show is going to be a little skewed because the movies I'm going to be watching are ideally, again, I use this in quotations, going to be classics, movies that are considered some of the best of the best. These are movies I've sadly missed out on, and I'm trying to rectify that and watch them for the first time and give my honest, nostalgia-free opinions on them. My without the rose tint, that's why I call this stupid show Clear Tinted Classics. It's a dumb pun, but I think it kind of makes sense, I guess. But the first Godfather movie, I gave an 8.5 out of 10. Again, on a regular scale, that movie would easily be a 10 out of 10. It's fantastic. And this movie, I was really excited to watch it because I feel like a lot of people consider this to be one of the few examples of a sequel being better than an original. I think a lot of people think The Godfather 2, as good as The Godfather is, The Godfather 2 improves upon it. It's hard for me to say because I really do wish I had time to sit down and go through front to back both these movies again and really pick through what feels good to me and what doesn't, because it's hard. I gave the first movie an 8.5. This movie, the question is, did I think this movie was better than The Godfather? And deep down in my initial reaction to it, I think that it was. I think it was a better movie. There's so much more going on in the movie. There's so much more to delve into. I have a strong feeling that sort of my fear of giving these snap judgments is that if I went back and watched The Godfather, I'd be like, oh man, but this is like so good, and it's actually is. But just because there's so much to dig into with The Godfather 2, I feel pretty secure in saying that if I were to go back and like really delve into these movies super deep and watch them several times over and over and put them up against each other, I have a strong feeling that in the end, I would still come out thinking that The Godfather 2 was better just because there's more to dig into. Obviously, Coppola, stuff like this, these kinds of movies where you start to, same with like a lot of TV shows where in the second season, once they've got like a good handle on who the characters are, they can really expound upon them and explore them in more nuanced ways. I think you get that with this movie. And the flashback stuff with De Niro is all so fun to watch and so well handled and satisfying. It just all feels so satisfying. All the tragedy that you have to like go through watching Michael, every once in a while you get this reprieve where you just get to watch De Niro be a badass and be cool and dominate. And it just feels so good. Like there's a lot to be said about a movie that just makes you feel good when you watch it. And I stress that this movie does end as a tragedy, but the De Niro stuff is just fun to watch. And it's so cool watching him get a revenge on people and set the world right, you know? And again, because that feels so good, the echoes of it make the stuff with Michael so much more tragic in the mirror image of what you're watching. Not only does it feel good, it's serving this great purpose to emphasize what you're seeing in the present day stuff. It's a phenomenal movie. Again, though, and maybe this will come back to haunt me because I may never watch a movie as good as The Godfather 2, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a 9 out of 10. And maybe that means that no other movie I ever watch will get a 9.5 or a 10 because no movie I ever watch may ever be as good as The Godfather 2. But the fact of the matter is, I think it was better than The Godfather, not by light years or anything like that, but I think it was better, and I think it deserves a better score. So here on Clear Tinted Classics, I'm giving The Godfather 2 a 9 out of 10. And as I hope will always be the case, I'd like to close the show out by recommending a movie that maybe a lot of people haven't seen. Because not only have I missed a lot of classic movies, I've also seen a lot of like more obscure movies that I feel like people kind of skipped or just weren't that interested in. And I had a really hard time figuring out what I want to recommend at the end of this episode because I blew two of my really good ones on the first episode with In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths, which, by the way, if you still haven't watched those movies, please go watch them. They're phenomenal. They're fantastic. Go watch them now. Like, I'd rather you go watch those movies than even keep listening to the sound of my dumb voice right now. Turn this episode off and just go watch them. They're great. For those of you that are actually still here, I thank you. And I think what I'm going to recommend, and it's not even because I think this movie's great. It's just a movie I watched on a whim, and I was trying to find a connection to The Godfather 2. I want to find connections to the movies I watch for the episodes to the movies I recommend. And what I'm going to recommend is The Judge with Robert Duvall and Robert Downey Jr. I stress that this movie isn't exactly the most fantastic movie I've ever seen, but I do think it was underrated. I feel like a lot of people skipped out on it for some reason. I heard it get made fun of because I think there's like a scene where they like has something to do with like farting or butt cheeks or like there's like some sort of weird like poop joke that's involved in the movie. And a lot of people like really latched onto that to show that the movie was stupid. But the movie's actually a really great father-son drama. If you go in for the father-son stuff, this movie's got it in spades. And you got Robert Duvall and Robert Downey Jr. playing off of each other. Obviously, they're both phenomenal actors. They're fantastic in the movie. I think Vincent D'Onofrio is in this movie too. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's like around, I think, or at least there's a character very similar to him. And he's like, I think, Downey Jr.'s brother in the movie. I thought it was good. And if you like Robert Duvall, which you should, he's fantastic in the Godfather movies. I feel bad I didn't really get to do a deep dive into his character, but I think his character serves a lot more like thematic purpose in the movies than in terms of like surprising you. I really did love his scene with Pacino where Pacino's like, you are my brother. And Duvall's basically like, that's literally all I've ever wanted to hear. And you're like, yeah. And he like, Pacino's literally like, yeah, I know. Like, I was like, okay, fair enough. But, you know, Duvall's great. And I think getting to see him in his older years be the patriarch, the godfather of his own family, the judge, I guess, if you want to put it in terms of that movie. It's fun. It's a fun movie and it's worth watching. It's not great. If I was giving it like a normal score, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10. Not in terms of the criteria of this show, but in terms of just regular overall movies. But it's really solid. It's worth a watch. And if you missed out on it, I highly recommend it, especially if you like Robert Duvall or Downey Jr. They're both great in the movie. It's worth a watch. And so, yeah, that's going to do it for me, your host, Jake Baker, here on the show called Clear Tinted Classics. That's what I committed to. I guess I'm not going to change it. I appreciate everyone that made it this far. Hopefully, this episode wasn't too painful. I'm trying to get better, and hopefully I will. But for now, I'll catch you guys all on the flip-flop later. That is the outro I'm committed to, I guess. Peace.